For our last example in this lesson, we're going to take a look at one more version of the class account. And in this case, we're going to store in an account object both a name for the account holder and a balance associated with a given account object as well. So as you can see here, we once again have the class account. This time we're in the project account 4, which I've already opened here. And we have two pieces of data in this example. One is represented by the auto-implemented property called name, just like we did in the last example. And again, that name property in this case is a read-write property. It has both a get and a set accessor that will be generated by the compiler, along with a private instance variable that they will manipulate. All of that's handled by the C# compiler for you. Now, when you're declaring data in a class in C#, it's common to do that either as a property or as an instance variable, either an auto-implemented property or an instance variable. In fact, it's considered good practice in C# to manipulate every piece of data for your class, even inside the body of the class, via a property of the class. For simple properties where you simply need to return in a get accessor or assign a value in a set accessor, you can use the auto-implemented property syntax as we did here. For any property where you have more logic that needs to be performed in either the get accessor or the set accessor or both, you must provide a full property definition, and that's why we have the instance variable called balance here, as well as a property called balance, which we'll look at in a subsequent video. Now, I'll be talking about the data type decimal, which is one of C#'s built-in simple types, a little bit more in the next lesson. But basically, anytime you're handling monetary amounts in C#, you should always work with type decimal. And decimals are used to represent precise floating point arithmetic, whereas with doubles and floats, the arithmetic can be somewhat imprecise, introducing rounding errors that are just not appropriate for financial type calculations. Now, of course, we have very simple uses of the decimal called balance in this particular example, so it's not really incredibly necessary for us to use decimal here, but as a good practice, anytime you're representing a monetary amount in C#, you should be using the decimal data type for that purpose. And again, we'll talk about that type in more details in the next lesson. Now, we did declare this data as private because we only want the methods and properties of class account to be able to manipulate the balance directly. So by making it private, that gives us, as the designer of the class, the control over how the balance gets exposed to clients of the class. And the way the balance gets exposed in this example is you can initialize it via the account constructor, which we'll look at in a moment. You can manipulate it via the balance property. And as you'll see, we also have a deposit method, which we'll look at in a subsequent video as well. Now, the constructor for this class is a little bit more elaborate than the previous constructor because we now have two pieces of information. We have the name property, the auto-implemented property, which of course has a corresponding hidden private instance variable. And then we have the decimal balance, which is a private instance variable. And we need to initialize both of those items. If we don't specify how to initialize them, the name string will get the value null by default, which is not an empty string, but literally a reference to nothing. And the balance will get the value 0 by default. But we don't want those to be the defaults. We want to force the user who's creating an account object to specify an account name and specify an initial balance. So this constructor requires two arguments, one that's going to be placed into the account name parameter and one that's going to be placed into the initial balance parameter of types string and decimal, respectively. Now, in the body of this constructor, we simply assign the account name to the name property. That's going to invoke the auto-generated set accessor for that property and store the string in the auto-generated private instance variable of type string. Then down at line 13, we take the initial balance parameter and assign it to the balance property, and that is going to invoke the set accessor of this balance property that we're going to look at in the next video.